האוויר, המקום הולכים, נמצאים בצרה לרווחה. ומאפל לנו משעבוד לגאולה, השתה בהגנה וחמה עיקרית, ומאמר אמן. אוקיי. בוקר טוב, everybody. Good morning. So, this is our third class in this series. The next one and last one will be next week. So whereas the four Shurim series that we did in the winter was about war in general, from a halachic perspective, this series was dedicated to issues related to the war that are very much in the media. And consequently, the first two classes that we finished last week were about the chiyuv of Torah learners to serve in the army. We dedicated for that two classes. And now, as you could see from the title of your source sheet, we're talking about another thing that everyone that turns on the radio, mamish today, literally when I was driving here, so these two topics were at the front, the giyus, the draft of a yeshiva bachurs, and of course everything that has to do with the hostages and deals, to what deals, are we doing enough, are we not doing enough? Okay, so of course this is a political, partially a political argument, unfortunately, meaning also based on facts that some of them are, if we'll be honest with ourselves, not all of them are known to us. I mean, to me as a regular, ordinary civilian resident in this country, I don't know exactly the details about, what is on the table, what is not on the table, etc.
They don't know either.
Yeah, that probably. At any rate, so therefore, the shir will be dedicated. Okay, this shir and perhaps next week's shir. We'll see how much we'll do. Don't worry, if we'll cover everything this week, there's enough to do next week too. At any rate, as you see the title, I'm just reading it. Hostage release deals, if, how, and under what conditions. Okay? So I want to analyze the topic naturally from halachic sources and a halachic perspective. Now, interestingly enough, I'll start with an honest disclosure. This source sheet was created, you know when? In 2010. In 2010, I gave a shir in my community in Ramot about Gilad Shalit deal. That, by the way, was in one of the rounds, meaning I gave this shir even two times, one in 2010 and one in 2012. He was released, I think.
5 years ago.
What?
He was held for 5 years.
No, so when was he released?
He was taken 10 or 15.
Bidiyuk. And I gave the shir already 2010 because it was already then, it was one of the waves of discussion about it. And this source sheet was created. Then I reviewed it a little bit, but basically it's the same considerations and parameters. I'm saying basically because, of course, there are differences that should be said right up front. And that is, some of the arguments, as we'll see, have to do with the fact it's a soldier, and this soldier is a shaliach of us. Okay, so that brings a certain status to a soldier. However, a civilian, one can argue, and there is a lot of logic in this, that a civilian, that it's not that he acted not responsibly, let's say like Elchanan Tenenbaum, okay? That you could say, okay, he didn't go as a soldier, he risked himself, therefore we have less duty or obligation to, but when we're talking about the hostages in this event, okay, well, these are people that were innocent civilians that didn't do anything not responsible, and actually one can argue that the country has even a greater duty towards them than to a soldier. Okay? So all these things, of course, and by the way, what I've just said now, anyone can say, meaning it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a rabbi or Jewish sources. Okay, an atheist would say the same arguments, or a Scandinavian. It has nothing to do with halacha. It has to do with moral and common sense. Okay, now, therefore, and that will be my last introductory remark before we go to the sources himself. One can argue, I'm doing a kind of a spoiler, one can theoretically argue, look, at the end of the day, what did the Jewish sources add here? All of your considerations at the end of the day could have been said by an Italian, a moral Italian, a moral American. What does it have to do? Maybe we should just say this is a discussion that is not relevant to a halachic discussion. Because as I'll show, the sources that I'll bring are very limited in terms of how much I can infer from them to our situation. And I'll explain why. Why there is a certain gap, a basic gap, a fundamental gap. But still, I want to argue, and you know what, I'll explain the gap the gap is very simple. Most of the sources, as we discussed regarding the previous topic, and regarding the series I gave in the winter, naturally, since historically, most of the halachic literature was written when we were in exile, Shulchan Aruch, etc., even though Shulchan Aruch was living here, but either in exile or living here, but not with a sovereign Jewish state. Therefore, discussions that have to do with a sovereign Jewish state, a lot of the halachic literature is not that rich with it. It's only we have Rav Kook in the last generations that wrote about these things, the Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Yisraeli, Rabbi Herzog, okay? These are the names. Now, Rav Asher Weiss writes about it a little bit, but there's not a lot of, naturally, and that's why I used last week the Rambam more than the Shulchan Aruch, naturally, because the Rambam did write about a lot of stuff, including Hilchot Malachim, etc. So there is this basic gap. So if we see, let's say, a Mishnah in Gittin, which is a widely quoted source, justifiably regarding our topic, but that Mishnah is talking about Pidyon Shvuyim of a community, not a state, a community that is facing a challenge that one of its Jewish members was kidnapped by Gentiles, and now they ask for money, and how much should I pay or not? Well, that's not the same scenario as a country that is in the middle of a war, and part of the war is that there are hostages. This is a very, very different situation. So, naturally, there are gaps between many of the sources. I'm talking not about the last generation halachis, but about the ancient sources, the basic halachic sources, Gemara, Shulchan Aruch, etc. Some of them are talking about a total different context and situation than what we're going to talk about. Okay? So one might argue, all right, so Rabbi, just admit that you have nothing to say about the topic, or nothing special more than just a regular civilian, a prime minister, the head of the opposition, whatever, the public discussion, a public moral, practical discussion that could be done in Italy, in America, in any moral state. What is the added value of your shiur? One can challenge me. And the answer is that even though we acknowledge the fact that we can't take the sources and just copy-paste, but we get some inspiration, meaning we get directions, we get some parameters from these sources. We see where the Jewish ethic and value is rooted. Okay, we could get inspiration from these sources while acknowledging that it's not a copy-paste halacha l'maisa and there will always be room, that's what I'm going to argue, for a government to make national considerations, because that's exactly what they're authorized and entitled to do, even based on the sources. Okay? So after saying this intro, let's jump directly to the sources. So I want to start with the Rambam in Hilchos Matnot Aniyim, because this Rambam just is one important vector, value that must be as one of the inspiring parameters when we deal with such a sensitive topic. The Rambam says the following. I'm reading the first source. Pidyon Shvuim, the redemption of captives, kodem leparnasat aniyim lechsutan, has a higher priority than feeding or supporting poor people and for giving them parnasa and for covering them, meaning giving them clothes. Meaning, if you have a convict, should I use the money? Let's say there is a limited amount of resources. Should I first redeem a captive or take care of clothes to a poor person? The redeeming of the captive takes priority. And then the Rambam says, the word that is quoted many times, even by our president, Herzog, Ve'en lecha mitzvah gdola kepidyon shvuyim. The Rambam says here, inspirationally, there is no greater mitzvah than redeeming captives. And why is that? Because the captive is included in the people that are hungry, starving, thirsty, naked, and omed besakanat nefashot, and he has a life danger. V'amalim einav mipidyono, and anyone who ignores the opportunity or is closing his eyes from turning his eyes from redeeming him, he is violating the negative commandment of you should not harshen your heart, and don't close your hand, and don't bystand by your fellow's blood, and on ignoring someone that is now enslaved and working hard by others in front of your eyes. And he canceled the positive commandment of you should open your hand and give. And he also violates the positive commandment of and you should live with your brother, meaning support him and financially. He cancels and save people who are going to die. And many of the rest. Meaning the Rambam here gives you a whole list of negative commandments and positive commandments that you violate if you ignore, if you are closing your eyes from redeeming a captive. And then he frames the whole halacha by two statements. The first one was, Ein lecha mitzvah gdola kepidyon shvuim. There is no greater mitzvah than redeeming captive. And now his concluding clause, Ve'ein lecha mitzvah rabba kepidyon shvuim, which is pretty much the same. And you don't have a greater, a bigger mitzvah rabba, mega. And you don't have a bigger mitzvah, you don't have such a mega mitzvah as redeeming captives. So that's a very strong statement of the Rambam. And I think it's very important to remember it, no matter what is your practical conclusion regarding the topic that is now on the table. Okay? Everyone should have, as an inspiring point of departure, this is a very, very big value in Judaism to redeem captives. Yeah?
But circumstances aren't mentioned, such as having a war.
I said that. Okay? All right? We're starting. The starting point is that the Rambam says generally, redeeming captives is a very, very big mitzvah. Yeah, clearly, you could even infer from the Rambam's wordings, the location, Hilchot Matnot Aniyim, that it's the area of the mitzvah here, and as we said already in the previous year, it's very important. Any lamdin in any yeshiva that learns Rambam knows that the order and the context is very critical in the Rambam. So here the context is Hilchot Tzedakah. He talks about opening your wallet. Okay, that's what he speaks here about. So clearly he speaks about, yes, you should make a lot of effort and don't be stingy with money. This is the thing you should spend your money on. Obviously, what we're talking about here is very different, meaning releasing terrorists, etc. Sure. Still, I brought this source because the Rambam here sets the tone saying this is a very, very important value. Okay? Now let's see what is the Rambam basing himself on. He bases himself on the Gemara. He didn't make it up from his mind. This terminology, mitzvah rabbah, mega mitzvah, that term he took from the Gemara.
Yeah.
The Gemara says the following, Gemara in Bava Batra, Daf Chet, Yativ Rav Yosef v'kame ayin ba. Rav Yosef was sitting and learning, and he analyzed, my mitzvah rabbah, what is a mega mitzvah? Mitzvah rabbah, like great grandpa or great grandma. How do we say that in Hebrew? Saba Rabba, Savta Rabba. Okay, so there's a mitzvah Rabba. Great mitzvah. Okay, it's the same thing. So, Yativ Rav Yosef v'kame ayin ba. My mitzvah Rabba. What do you mean by mitzvah Rabba? Because they said that Pidyon Shvuyim is mitzvah Rabba. Amar le Abaye said, Midatane Rav Shmuel Bar Yuda, we have a Baraita, Tanaik source that Rav Shmuel quoted, Ein poskin tzedakah leyetomim, afilu lepidyon shvuyim. Yeah? You don't enforce orphans to give tzedakah, little orphans to give tzedakah. You don't enforce them. And even for redeeming captives. Even that you won't enforce on orphans. Shma mina, pidyon shvuyim, mitzvah rabbahi. So because the terminology of the Tanaic source is, I don't take money from orphans, and even for redeeming captives. So what do you see? That what's the highest level? Redeeming captives. Of course, because they go to the extreme. All right? So shma mina, so you could infer that pidyon shvuyim is a big mitzvah. Amar le Rava. Now the Gemara will explain why. Part of it again, the Rambam quoted, but you'll see here it's even more crystallized. Amar Rava Rabba Bar Mari. Rava said to Rabba Bar Mari, Menaha Milta. What is the source? From where is this thing that they say, the Amur Rabbanan, that the rabbis say, the Pidyon Shvuyim Mitzvah Rabbahi? Why did the rabbis define that redeeming the captives is such a mega mitzvah? Why? What caused them to say that? Or what is the source that they're based? He says Amarle, so he's answering the Chtiv because there is a verse in Jeremiah. That's what inspired the rabbis. V'ayak yomu elecha ana netzeh, and when they will tell you where should we go, v'amata alehem, and then you will answer them. Kol amar Hashem. This is what God said. Asher lamut, lamut. One who will die, will die. Asher lacherev, lacherev. One who will be hit by a sword, will be hit by a sword. Asher la'av, la'av. One who will starve, or will starve. Asher lashevi, lashevi. And one who will be taken as a captive, will be taken as a captive. Ve'amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan inferred, Kol ha'meuchar bepasuk zeh kashe mechavero. Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan claims that this pasuk is in order, and the worst scenario is the last one, meaning there is just regular death, then death by sword, that's even more painful, death by starving, that is a greater torture, and captivity, that's the worst. By the way, regarding that quote, they're suffering but they're not dying, yeah, but you see here that at least Rabbi Yochanan thought slightly differently. So, Kol ha'meuchar bepasuk kashe mechavero, and now the Gemara explain why is that, because I would say to die is worse than being kept. Why is Rabbi Yochanan assuming that the sequence of severity is death, sword, starvation, captivity? So, the Gemara says, and here it's in bolded letters, Shevi is the worst one, the kulhu itinhu bei, because that includes all the umbrella. The one who is in captive, he is starving, he's at life risk, etc., meaning he has all of the bad things that were listed before are at being a captive, and therefore it's considered the worst thing, and therefore Pidyon Shvuyim is defined halachically as mitzvah rabbah and the highest priority in terms of spending money. Okay? That's the starting point, the Gemara and the Rambam that is based on this Gemara.
If it's only money, it's good.
Wait a minute. I know there are a lot of comments here, and we will consider all the considerations, as I said. I still think, as a point of departure, we have to lay out several inspirational sources, okay? Because as you say, if it was only for money, that's one thing. That doesn't allow someone to say they're only suffering, they're not dying, okay? So, all right. The Shulchan Aruch, and also it's not true, but okay. Shulchan Aruch Yoredea Hilchot Tzedakah. So the Shulchan Aruch is saying the following. This is look, the Rambam was in Hilchos Matnot Aniyim, which is really the place where he speaks about Hilchot Tzedakah. So the Shulchan Aruch has a portion called Hilchot Tzedakah, and he says the following: Kol rega shemeacher lifdot hashvuim, every moment that he is delaying from redeeming captives, heichadeh efshar leakdim, in a situation where you could have did it earlier and you were just negligent, lazy. Okay, you waited too much. Havei ki'ilu shofech damim. You're considered as a blood speller, or as spelling blood. All right, so that's one vector. Now let's look at another vector that might seem the opposite. And that's the Gemara in Gittin. Yeah, we reviewed beforehand the Gemara in Bava Batra and the Rambam based on it. Let's see the Gemara in Gittin. That's a very famous Gemara, Mishnah. It's a Mishnah and Gemara, always quoted in the context, already in the Jibril deal at the 80s. As you know, there was a big Ahmad Jibril deal that was done in the 80s, and this source was very much there on the front of the discussion, spotlight of the discussion. So let's see. Ein podin, the Mishnah rules. That's a Mishnah in Gittin. The context is many decrees. The context of this is the end, the last half, the second half of the Mishnah in the fifth chapter of Gittin, Perek HaNizakin, talking about all kinds of decrees on different areas that the sages did, mipnei tikun ha'olam, meaning all kinds of decrees, maybe is not the exact term, establishments, things that they ruled, the rabbis, the Tanaim, and they established it in order to fix the world, for the good of the world. So now let's see. Ein podin et hashvuim yeter al kedei dmehem. You did not redeem the captives. One should not redeem the captives. Yeter al kedei dmehen, overpaid. That's the literal translation. More than the cost. I know it's hard to. More of their worth, meaning to extra pay for them. One should not do that. Mipnei tikun haolam, because in order for the future benefit of society. Ve'ein mavrichin et hashvuim, and you also don't release captives by, let's say, a military operation like we've done. Don't do that. How come we did it? We did it. It's good we did it. But I'm not reading the text. No comments. Ein mavrichim et hashvuim mipnei tikun haolam, for the fixing of the world. Rashbag omer mipnei takanat hashvuim. Okay, I won't go into the details of. Okay, he says you don't do it because you need to take care of the safety of the captives. The first one said it's for the benefit of the world. But I want to focus on the first clause. You don't overpay for captives. Why? Because of thinking about the good of the general society of the world. Now the Gemara further analyzes what did exactly the rabbis mean by that, because we didn't explain it still. Why is the benefit of the world not to overpay? Why is that? No, you have an answer, but the Gemara will offer some answers. Okay, so don't block yourself with one kind of answer, since the Gemara offers at least two answers. So the Gemara says, Ibailu. The Gemara is asking, Hai mipnei tikun haolam. This term, don't overpay for captives, despite the fact that it's a mitzvah rabbah. Don't overpay for captives because of the fixing of the world, the benefit of society. So what is the meaning of it? Is it because of tuchka de tziburahu? It's because you shouldn't burden the public on too much of an expense, meaning if this amount of money is so gigantic, that will be a burden on the community. So the reason is mishum duchka de tzibura, or dilma, or maybe the reason is mishum de lo ligrabu v'leitut fei, or maybe the reason for the decree is because by that you will motivate these mafia people, because that's the context we're talking about. You will encourage these mafia people to kidnap more and more and to get more and more money. So in order not to motivate these mafia people, then even though you have a captive and he's suffering, and it's the greatest suffering ever, and it's a mitzvah rabbah to redeem him, the highest mitzvah, the highest tzedakah, the rabbis decreed, because of the future fear that will encourage mafia people to kidnap, so don't overpay. By the way, it's not clear what is overpaying. That is very subjective. So at any rate, we're leaving it as is, and the Gemara has here, it's not clear to the Gemara to interpret the correct interpretation of the Mishnah. Is the Mishnah saying don't overpay because it's too much of a burden on the community? Or don't overpay because you don't want to motivate the mafia people? The ramification will be the following. The Gemara will offer it soon, but I'm just saying. The nafkamina will be the following. Let's say it's not a burden on the community. It happened to be that there is a very rich community, or there is a sponsor here, or let's say the son of the wealthiest person there was kidnapped, and he's willing to pay everything. So there is no burden on the public, but yet the consideration of motivating the mafia still exists. So that will be enough kamina. So that's exactly what the Gemara says. Tashma. Come in here. The Levi Bar Darga, they want to prove from a story. 1 second. Levi Bar Darga. Oh, too quick. Okay. So Levi Bar Darga. Okay, good. Levi Bar Darga. Was a man. Levi Bar Darga. He was a very wealthy man. Parka Labrate. He redeemed his daughter that was caught as a captive. Betleisar Alfei Dinari Zahav. And he paid for her 13,000 gold dinars. Okay. So you see that he did it. So perhaps that proves the Gemara that the only reason the rabbis decreed was the burden on the community. But actually that consideration of motivating the lion, that wasn't a consideration. We ignore that consideration. We're not concerned with that consideration. And that's not an argument. Meaning, well, if there is no financial burden, we will do it. So that's the Chorah proof that when the Mishnah says Mipnei Tikkun Olam, it relates only to the financial burden. So the Gemara rejects that and says, Uman leimalan debertzot chachamim. But who told you that this Levi Bar Darga, when he redeemed his daughter for a fortune, that he did it with the agreement of the rabbis? Dilma shelo bertzon chachamim avad. Perhaps he just went ahead and did it and didn't ask the rabbis at all. But had he asked the rabbis, they would tell him that it's wrong because it's motivating the mafia. So, 1 second. So, at the end of the day, the Gemara remains in a suffix. It's not, what?
That's intelligent that it's a suffix because there's so many different circumstances.
The Gemara, in terms of interpreting the source, Mipnei Tikkun Olam, what is the reason for the decree? Is it only because it's a burden on the community, or it is because we don't do that even if it's not a burden, because it motivates the mafia? The Gemara is not clear. What is the correct interpretation of the Mishnah? Yeah.
Are we working on the assumption at this point, and I know it's dangerous to do and assume, that this is strictly financial transactions and not fortunate a number of other people?
First of all, you raise here a point that the context of this Mishnah and Gemara is very clear. It talks only about money and burden on the community. Just like the first source, by the way, about the mitzvah rabbah. It was in Hilchos Tzedakah. All right? All right? So that's a clear point. I would, if you allow me, I'll ask more. Some people said, okay, I'm now even quoting from the Jibril argument, meaning this is an ongoing public debate in Israel. Okay? This topic. It's not new. Of course, now we have some unique circumstances, as I said, of civilians kidnapped, innocent civilians kidnapped. Okay? And clearly the country has responsibility to them. 1 second. And clearly the country has responsibility for them. I'm not saying unlimited responsibility. Yeah? I hope everyone agrees that if the Hamas will say, I'm willing to release the hostages immediately, but I have one condition. There's no sovereign state of Israel at all. No sovereign state. You have the choice. You could go abroad. You could stay here under an Islamic regime. Okay? And we're willing, and we're releasing them immediately. I humbly assume that the vast majority of the population, of the Israeli population in Israel, will not agree to such a deal, including the relatives of the hostage, okay, or the majority of them. I gave that extreme example just to illustrate the point that, of course, there are parameters here, and when you say Bekol Mechir is clearly not true as an absolute statement. even the ones that are shouting B'kol Mechir are not standing behind, philosophically about that phrase, okay? Now, I'm just, I'm asking the following. So this is an ongoing discussion, okay? Now, let's say in the Jibril deal, and also in this deal, but in the Jibril deal in the 80s. I'm sorry. Okay, it's just, by the way, it's not that critical. It was just to illustrate the point that these dilemmas accompanied the state of Israel already decades. Yeah, we had captives already in the 80s and in the 70s and in the 90s. Okay, in the beginning of the 21st century. Yeah, and now. So in the 80s, in 1980s, there was a big deal that was done that some thousands of terrorists were released to get 8 soldiers, okay? And the deal was done with a terrorist organization which was led by a terrorist called Ahmed Jibril. Okay, so that's the Jibril deal that was done in the 80s. And it was done, yeah? Rabin, I think, was either the prime minister, I think it was the Ministry of Defense. Okay, it was the Ministry of Defense, Rabin. Okay, Zichrono Livracha. And for 8 soldiers, some thousands of, 1,000 maybe terrorists were released or something like that. That's the Jibril deal.
1,150.
Okay, and some rabbis who opposed, or rabbis or public figures opposing that deal, okay, claim that it's against halacha. Of course, everything that I disagree with is against halacha. Okay, so they said that this deal, and by the way, I'm not commenting whether it was a good deal or a bad deal. Maybe it was a bad deal because some of the terrorists there killed. Many more than 8 people were killed maybe as a result of that deal. So I'm not commenting whether it was a good deal or not, whether it was a responsible deal or not. I'm just now focusing on a very narrow statement. Rabbi said, this deal is against halacha, violates halacha. Why? Because we have a Mishnah that says you don't overpay, redeem captives more than their worth because of the fixing of the world. So this is against halacha. Do you think they are right that it's against halacha?
It's Haredi talk.
Let me promise you, Phil, that no Haredi rabbi said that. Only religious Zionist rabbi said that. What do you say about that?
I'll tell you what I say about it. I think it's a waste of time because every situation is different.
Sure.
The question, release terrorists who are going to come back and kill you. On the other hand,
You're absolutely right. I just wanted to point out to you that when you say something that you don't like about rabbis, which is I'm share with you, that it's a Haredi talk. Be careful, because in this case it was only right-wing religious Zionist rabbis that said this is against halacha because I have a Mishnah. Ein podim et tashbuim yeter ad kedei dmehem. At any rate, what do you have to say about that? That they say, here, there's a source. It says don't overpay. This is clearly overpaying, releasing 1150 or whatever terrorists. So you violate halacha. What do you say about that?
To me, it's simple because you have to know your enemy. And if you know these people, at least some of them are going to go back and do the same.
No, but you're not answering my question.
And that's the cost.
But you're not answering my question. I'm sorry. You're saying very smart things, but you're not answering the question. The question was, the question is, can I rule halacha l'maisa from this Mishnah that the deal of releasing 1150 terrorists in exchange for 8 soldiers is violating halacha? Okay, it's a yes or no question, and then give the reason. What? Okay, so
you got one against the other.
one against the other? What?
On what halachic basis do you determine the value of a person?
What?
What's the halachic basis?
But you said already the answer before.
I think that it's a correct thing to say that it's against halacha because we have sources in halacha which you brought. Obviously, they're subjective, and we don't know how much is overpaid and don't overpay. If they felt it was overpaying, then they feel that it's going against halacha.
Okay.
It's, this is monetary.
Very good.
All these are monetary things.
All
We're
of them.
talking about exchanging terrorists.
But the concept is here.
No, the
Don't
question.
overpay.
So, Chevra.
But what does over?
Okay, let's stop it here. Thank you for participating. Yeah. What?
Soldiers, you want to overpay because you want to encourage them to keep the soldiers alive.
Chevra, I'm not telling you what is my opinion. Again, I'm not. Wait 1 second. I'm not saying what is my opinion, neither regarding the Jibril deal or this deal or whatever. I just want us to be careful in interpreting sources and figuring out from them that this is the halacha regarding our case. And excuse me. And the thing is very simple, as was said here. These sources, with all the respect to these distinguished right-wing rabbis, that might be very correct in their thought and arguments, but you cannot say that a country, a government, Yitzhak Rabin, whatever, who decided on that deal, violated the Mishnah and the Gemara in Gittin. That's a wrong statement. And by the way, it's not only me. Rav Amital said that in a shir he gave then in the 80s, and it's very clear, because as was said here, the context is entirely different. We're talking here about a community, not a state, a community that is asked to pay a lot of money for someone that was caught by the mafia. And regarding that, the Mishnah says, don't overpay the money. And why don't overpay the money? Perhaps it's a suffix in the Gemara, because that will encourage the mafia to further kidnap. Now, yes, it could be that you could use the same argument and say, just like you don't want to encourage the mafia, you also don't want to encourage the Hamas. True. However, there's also other arguments, because this is a context of a war. And there is a context of the morale of the society, which is a very strategical, important consideration in running a war. Okay? Is the substantial amount of the population behind you? What should be done to strengthen their motivation and morals? Just one possible consideration. Another possible consideration. As opposed to a member of a community who was kidnapped by the mafia, a soldier, there is some certain responsibility, agreement, contract, however you want to call it, between the soldier and the country that sent the soldier. He's the shaliach of the people. That's very different. So there are all kinds of different considerations working sometimes in opposite directions. Okay? Don't get me wrong. Therefore, all the considerations are very complex. But one thing is very clear. This source doesn't talk about the Jibril argument, deal, doesn't talk about Gilad Shalit deal, and doesn't talk about a current potential hostage deal. The source just doesn't talk about it. Because since it doesn't talk about it, you can't say that if a government decided that in order, let's say, to strengthen the morale and the backing of the public to the army to continue the war, or something like that, that if they did it, and for that release terrorists, I'm saying, so they violated the Mishnah and Gittin, it's a wrong statement, period. And if Rabin, back then, again, perhaps he was wrong, but if Rabin was only the Minister of Defense, who was the Prime Minister? Shamir. Shamir. So if Shamir and Rabbi thought that as part of their building the army, building the trust of the soldiers in the army, okay? So their long-term thought is that you need to release these terrorists in order to save these 8 soldiers that are in captivity. They didn't violate this Mishnah, clearly, because this Mishnah talked about a different thing, okay? What can we take from this Mishnah? What can we take? Just like we took from this first source. We took from the first source a certain moral statement that redeeming captives is a very important thing. And it's a Jewish value. And we took from the second source that considerations of future kidnaps, considerations of not feeding the lion, not feeding the mafia, not feeding the Hamas, that these considerations are valid, halachic, valid considerations that should be taken. Okay? So these 2 things we definitely did take from the sources. Okay? But to say that these sources are limiting halachically the ability of a government to make these complex and wide considerations and therefore decide this way or that way is just wrong. Okay.
I want to agree with you in one respect.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a halachic question. I find it objectionable to take a pasuk and say because it says bim bom in the pasuk, then this has got to happen, good or bad. The fact is, every case has its circumstances and is different. It depends who they come for. Correct. For example, if Hamas had grabbed a couple of gangsters, we wouldn't be so concerned. But
you'll be surprised because Arik Sharon was concerned even about a gangster.
I know, yeah. But the point of the matter is everything a halachic question?
Not everything is a halachic question, yet still, let's say a community, we do see here that the halacha did relate to, let's say, a community that is faced by a demand by the mafia to pay. And here we would say there is a halachic source and a halachic answer. So I can't take what you're saying as an absolute statement. I could say again, I'm repeating myself, that we do see from these sources, and we should be proud of it, okay? And we will see later in a responsa from medieval times that it even writes it explicitly, that Jews in their genes, in their ethic, is to do a lot of effort to redeem their brothers. And we should be proud of that. Now, having said that, as I said, there are limits to everything. There are limits to everything. Again, I repeat my extreme example. It's good because if Hamas will tell, hey, you have brotherhood, right? That's your Jewish DNA. That's your Jewish blood. Therefore, we're giving you all the captives. Even the ones that we killed, we're now miraculously injecting to them something that they will do tchias ametim. Everything. But just one little condition, no sovereign Jewish state. With all the respect to our Jewish DNA and brotherhood and arvus, we will stop there. Yeah.
There's still a flaw in the whole thing. None of these halachic observations have ever said, in any case, how much, in any case, is overpaying.
Right.
There's never any guideline given.
That's true.
Which is
so,
good.
but by the way, the Rishonim did discuss this a little bit in order to interpret it. But right, they left it open, and Phil says maybe it was smart that they left it open because it gives more room for maneuvering.
Side point. I'm not going no question. I think a side point. In the Entebbe case, the government did turn to a group of Rabbanim, including Rabbi Yosef,
right,
Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, to hear their halachic feeling about the releasing of the... Very
good. Look, there is a difference between saying, look, my Rebbe Rav Amital, that has to do with Phil's remark, and I'm digressing a little bit because it's important, okay? It's a more meta discussion, but it's an important discussion. I'll share with you my viewpoint. Maybe some of the rabbis that teach here in Nitzanim express different viewpoints, and that's fine. We have to be careful between two extremities. Okay, let me explain. I have a very good friend that was actually my roommate in yeshiva. He's a famous guy, not like me. His name is Michael Eisenberg. Okay, he's a successful businessman, etc. Okay, and Michael wrote an article about a decade ago or more, and I'll be a little blunt when I'll present his position, simply because I disagree with it, with a lot of love, of course, but I disagree. He kind of called the rabbis. I disagree with some of it. I'll explain. I understand where it came from. I even share the sentiment of where it came from, but I think he went too far, and I'll explain you what I mean by that. He called the rabbis here in Israel, stop being involved in politics. It's doing bad for the rabbinate. Just focus on spiritually leading your communities. Just like in America. He said, take the rabbinic model of the exile, of a rabbi who is a devoted rabbi in the community, hopefully a spiritual leader, and just don't deal with politics. It's bad for the politics, it's bad for the rabbinate. Now, I understand where it comes from. I do think that too much involvement of rabbis in politics is bad for all sides. I agree with him. Furthermore, both of us are Talmidim of Rav Amital, who said, not everything is halacha. Exactly as Phil says. Not all Judaism is halacha.
What do you mean?
Okay?
You mean taking values from other...
No. I just mean that not... Okay, singing, 1 second. Singing songs in Shalosh Sudas is a very important spiritual experience. It's not a halacha. Not all Torah and worshiping is halacha, is narrow halacha. There are more to Judaism. Now, after saying that, Rav Amital himself also was an outspoken representative, meaning, let me clarify more what I mean by not everything is halacha. Rav Amital, on the one hand, was against the concept of Das Torah. Das Torah is something that was invented by the Chazon Ish, but really a little bit before, that I can get psak about everything. Meaning, let's say, which party to vote for in the elections, I'm giving you a psak. You need to vote for Degel Torah, and that's my halachic ruling. And we see it as a halachic ruling. Now, Rav Amital was very much against that. Not everything is subject to a halachic ruling. Not every question in life. Okay? The whole concept of Das Torah, meaning that the rabbis tell you what to do in every area of your life, okay, it's false. Okay? So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, Torah, and Rav Amital was a very strong advocate of what I'm going to say now, Torah is not limited only to kashrut, to hilchos kashrut, hilchos tefillah, meaning if you want to put the rabbis in the cage, meaning saying, okay, I'm representing now in an extreme way what Michael Eisenberg wrote it. Rabbis, just stick with your communities, give them spiritually inspiring talks, and mind this business, and don't relate to any other area in life. Well, that's wrong. Our Torah is Torat Chaim, and our Torah has to say things about everything. It's not a halachic ruling, okay? Just like here, as I mentioned, the bottom line is that the government has the authority to do all the complex considerations and decide. Yet still the rabbis could and should say inspiring and value-oriented things regarding the matter. Be it army service, be it hostage deals, okay? So I will say, yes, there's a Jewish DNA to do a lot of effort, including painful prices, to release hostages. That will be one thing. And the other thing will be, yes, you should make wide considerations about the general benefit of the community. And sometimes these considerations will lead you not to do a certain deal. Yeah, and yes, there is an added value as Jews that we root these statements on Jewish sources, ancient Jewish sources and ancient Jewish DNAs. So this is where we go in between. Yes, the rabbis could speak about peace. They could speak about Eretz Yisrael. They could speak about economy. They could speak about all because our Torah is Torat Chaim. On the other hand, there should be a distinction between what is a halachic ruling and what is a value-oriented considerations.
In the circumstances.
Yeah. So, after, let's see, what time is it? I have 2 minutes. That's a lot. Let's go now to Gemara Gittin Nunchet Amud Aleph. Okay? Because we do want to finish at least the first page here. Tanu Rabbanan. Maaseh Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania. That's a very famous story. Shehalach lekach gadol sheberomi. That he went to a big city in Rome. Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania. That was one of the top Tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua. Yes, students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Yoshua, he went to a big city in Rome. Amrulo, they told him, Tinok, there is a little kid. Tinok means a kid. Kid less than bar mitzvah. Tinok echad yesh bebeit asurim. There is a kid in the prison. Yefeh enayim betov roi ukvutzotav sdurot lo taltalim. He's good looking and has nice hair. Halach ve'amad al petach beit asurim. He stood at the entrance of the prison and he said loudly, Mi natan limshisa Yaakov ve'Yisrael lebozezim. Who, it's a pasuk from Isaiah, and he quoted the first half of it. Who brought Jacob and the Am of Israel to be in captivity and being abused? And now Totinok ve'amar. And this kid, who apparently was a Talmud Chacham, this little kid, he completed the verse. He heard him from the prison. He said it loud, and he heard from the window or whatever. The kid said, Halo Hashem, zu chatanu lo. It's God who put us in the hands of the goyim. It's God that we sinned to him, and we refused to go in his ways, and we didn't hear, and they didn't hear his Torah. So he was very impressed, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania, and he said, Muftachani bo shemoreh Torah b'Yisrael. I am sure that he will become a big Torah ruler and leader. Havodah. And then he swore, Rabbi Yoshua, Eini zaz mikan ad she'efdenu bekol mamon sheposkin alav. I'm not moving from here until I'll redeem it in every price that they will ask me for. So you note the contradiction. Now, Rabbi Yoshua, you learned the Gemara in Gittin. The Gemara in Gittin say don't overpay money. And here Rabbi Yoshua says clearly exactly the opposite. I'm willing to pay every amount of money that they will require me. Amru, and the story concluded, they said, Lo zaz misham, he didn't go away from there, Rabbi Yoshua, ad shepda'o b'mamon arbe, till he redeemed it with a tremendous amount of money. V'lo hayu yamim muatin, and they were in a few days, meaning later on, ad sho'ah, and indeed this kid became a big Torah posek, a big ruler. Umano, and who is that kid that Rabbi Yoshua redeemed for a gigantic amount of money? Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, the famous Tana Rabbi Yishmael. So here we have a story in Gittin that Rabbi Yoshua violated. This is Gittin Nunchet, Gittin 58. Well, Rabbi Yeshua violated Gittin Memhei, Gittin 45. Yeah? So we obviously need to reconcile the sources and understand what permitted Rabbi Yeshua to violate a decree done by the sages that were before him. Yeah? So, what?
He worked out the value, the potential value of the prison.
No, he says, Kol mamon sheposkin alav. That's the problem. The term is, I will pay any amount that they will say. So, don't worry. I'm leaving you. It's a good way to depart. I'm leaving you with a question. Contradiction between sources. As we know, who are the experts in trying to harmonize sources? Tosfos. So we'll see what Tosfos will say. This we'll see, Bezrat Hashem, next week. What?
I said human next week.
Thank you very much.
Please remind me your name, please.
What?
Remind me your name.
Sadie Kaplan.